this episode. Kapchagai, most popular holiday destination or place of mystery and riddles. Lake Kapchagai literally can be called a resort. Fishing, jet skiing and motorboating, water park and many other attractions attract thousands of tourists. However, this place has another glory. Legends about ghosts, floating coffins, catfish killers and a woman who has hooves instead of feet. Probably there is no other city in Kazakhstan which has so many frightening stories. Every third person claims that he witnessed some otherworldly nature on this lake or on the route leading to Kapchagai. What secrets does this place keep? And why it is paradise for some people and the city of spirits and demons for others? Where could the Kapchagai reservoir actually be located? There was a special committee meeting. How did fogs appear in Almaty? We suddenly noticed that fogs appeared quite often in Almaty. How did the dinosaur appear in Kapchagai? Old residents are likely to remember that, but geologists know that at one time on this place there was a so-called Ili Lake. Legends and a real story of Kapchagai. Watch right now. Probably there is no more popular recreation place for residents of Almaty and Almaty region. In some of the local beaches are crowded with vacationers. But few of them know the real story of the city of Kapchagai and the reservoir of the same name. My name is Andrei Slozhin. It is the Time Puzzle. The city of Kapchagai is an hour's drive from Almaty. It has more than 50,000 people. The city is located on the coast of the Konominal Reservoir. Kapchagai is relatively young by historical standards. It was founded in 1970. However, despite this, there is a lot of different legends and stories about it. Many believe that the city was built near the reservoir since this place was perfect to open here all kinds of resorts and sanatoria. There are many people who are sure that this lake is not artificial, but of natural origin, and it was here long before the arrival of people. The writer, publicist, local historian and native inhabitant of Kapchagai, Vladimir Taran, told us how the place for the construction of a new city was chosen.
In 1965,
the Leningrad Research Institute began to develop design estimates and economic justification for the construction of a new city. And work was carried out to select a site for the construction of the future city for not less than 200,000 people. There were four basic options. The first option was in the area of Chigildi village, 110 kilometers from Almaty. But there is the most level ground, the most fertile soil. After taking into account other technical and economic indicators, the first option was the Chingilda area. But there were disadvantages in this choice. Firstly, it was far from Almaty, 110 kilometers. Secondly, far from the construction of the Kapchagai hydroelectric power station and from the settlement of hydro builders, which had already received its outlines. There were already not only domestic establishments, but also some enterprises were already under construction. The second and third variants of the location of the new city were planned in the Zarechny settlement or in the Arnar settlement, but they were withdrawn because the terrain is hilly there and the soil is sandy. In addition, the Kaskelenka river flows nearby and in spring it spreads. Thus it could cause inconveniences to the residents of the new city. So they stopped on the fourth option. There was a special committee meeting. The site, which now is occupied by the city, was recognized. It was preferable since it was closer to the village of hydraulic builders. The first detachment of builders of 15 people literally landed here in January 1963. Then the need to build this city was due to the fact that in the future the city of Almaty would expand, would overflow. And a neighbor city was needed in order to pull off a part of the population here to the future Kapchagai city. The city of Kapchagai owes its appearance mainly to the fact that the construction of the Kapchagai hydroelectric station was planned here. The Kazakh branch of the All-Union Design and Research Institute Hydro Project in 1959 was engaged in its design. The author of the idea of building a new hydropower plant was Shafik Chokin, academician, Soviet energy scientist, and founder of the energy science in Kazakhstan. Chokin redesigned a draft several times in the period from 1961 to 1964. However, such a long planning did not stop the construction. In the very first year, 1963, the construction of the Almaty-Kapchagai road began. The first thing was the construction of the road, then the power line. It was established here in the first year. Specialists for the construction of hydropower plants were looked for throughout the country. It was a very important and responsible matter, which was under the control of the authorities. It was impossible to allow to build a project people who did not have experience. Not only the prestige of the leaders and authors of the project were at the stake, but also the lives of future citizens. Construction was led by Building and Construction Department Irtysh Gorstroy. After they completed construction in eastern Kazakhstan, first the Ust-Kamenogorsk hydroelectric station, then the Bukhtarma hydroelectric station. Their staff, including the management team, came from Bukhtarma to Kapchagai. What interesting could be in building a new city and hydroelectric power station? Then such large-scale projects were conducted throughout the Soviet Union. Although there is one story that food lovers will enjoy. It was told by the writer and journalist Vasily Shupeykin. There is a very interesting fact. There was no Koktal before Kapchagai. It was in Kapchagai when the first spill of water occurred in spring, and the carp crawled onto the grass to spawn. They were seized by workers with their bare hands. While they cooked a fish broth once or twice, then they desired something tasty. And one of them suggested something. There was the most common grid through which the sand was shaken so that it becomes smaller. They put a fish on this net, gutted it. Someone added vegetables and spices to it. They cooked all this on the fire and a wonderful dish, koktal, appeared. Of course, the very dish, koktal, appeared a long time ago, but initially was different from the modern one. So in Kazakh language, koktal means green willow. Nomads who lived on the banks of the Ili, Irtysh, Sirdarya rivers near Balkhash Lake for centuries cooked fish in this way. It was simple and tasty. It was enough to catch a fish, strung it on the branches of a willow, smoke over the fire, and tasty dish was ready. Kapchagai builders improved it a little. They asked for vegetables from the garden, from the locals, and stuffed fish with them. If they had sour cream, they also used it. Coming up next, how did the stories of the dead and coffins floating around the lake appear? I must admit I chose this topic because of the mass of legends that hover around the lake and the city of Kapchagai. One of them tells about the men eating catfish. Fortunately, it turned out to be just a tale of local fishermen who make fun of the visitors. The second legend is more sinister. It tells that when the lake began to be flooded, authorities simply forgot to evacuate people from the village of Ilisk. Hundreds of corpses of people and animals were thrown onto the shore. The water washed away the cemetery and coffins floated across the lake. I managed to get acquainted with a resident of Kapchagai who turned out to be a native of the village of Ilisk. This is what Abdemurza Satpayev told me. In fact, the actual name is Ili. It comes from the name of the river, Ili, which means sparkling. There was a village 140 years ago. The first documented references to people who lived in this region date back to 1255. They were made by a Flemish monk and traveler Guillaume de Rubruck in his book Journey to the Eastern Countries. Rubruck, by order of King Ludwig VIII, went to the Mongols with a diplomatic mission. The path of Rubruck ran through Kazakhstan. He left a detailed description of the ancient cities of the Great Steppe. He also wrote about the river, which originates in the high mountains on the border with China. As historians established later, this was a description of the Ili River. Originally, Ilysk was a picket on the highway that connected Verny with Kapal, and there further with Semipalatinsk. It was at the crossing. When Semyonov Tenchansky was traveling here, it was in 1856. They rode their horses across the river. Those were the Cossack horses. They were adapted to this. Then a bridge appeared there. And this village, it wasn't a connected farm because it was just associated with a transshipment of goods. Some goods were transported through Ili, although shipping there has always been so problematic. This is the road that goes straight into the lake and led to the village of Ilysk, or as it is called in some sources, Ili. Its history begins in 1853 when a garrison of 40 soldiers under the command of Coronet Laptev was organized here to protect the borders with China. Later in July of the same year, a military detachment of the Great Horde Commissary Mikhail Peremyshelsky, coming out of Kopal, approached the old Oguz-Utkel ferry that led across the Ili River to the Tian Shan Mountains. The detachment met an unprecedented thunderstorm, so the ferry was delayed for a week. It is not known for certain why Peremyshelsky stayed here with his detachment until winter, because he had the task to go deep into the Semirechye area and establish a military port there, and later a village which would later be called Verny. The cold winter and the deaths of the horses forced the commissary Peremyshelsky to settle in this area. He lived in Ilysk until spring. The nomadic Kazakhs joked that the Russian settlers brought their northern winter with them.
Илийск появился еще во времена империи на том месте, где...
Ilysk appeared as far back as the crossing of the Ili River appeared during the Russian Empire. Later a bridge was built there, and a railway bridge was also built there. After that, part of the Tuksib ran through it. So the village was quite large. It also had shipping across the Ili River. Immigrants from Russia and Ukraine began to arrive in the village. They began to build houses and gardens. A huge number of residents engaged in fishing. Subsequently, the first fish factory appeared in Ilysk. By the time Verny had been built up, the fish caught on the Ili River began to be brought to the markets of the new city. It took only 4 years to grow from a Cossack garrison in Ilysk to a large village. For example, when Semyonov Tenchansky came to Ilysk for the second time, and it was in 1857, he described it like this: "Only by the evening of May the 12th did I arrive after my memorable excursions to Ilysk, where our Russian settlement found completely equipped with beautiful forest material." In Tsarist times, Ilysk was a fairly developed village. Despite the fact that no more than 1,000 people lived here, it had its own pier. The steamboat General Kolpakovsky sailed through Ili River. It sailed upstream to China for the goods. Such a relatively calm and peaceful life in Ilysk lasted until the change of power in the country. There were no white-red clashes in the village. The change of power was relatively calm. The locals didn't go into particular and continued to go about their business. However, for the sake of justice, it is worth saying that with the arrival of the Soviets in the region, shipbuilding began to develop in Iliysk. So by 1934, 60 barges, ships and tugs circulated along the Ili River. In addition, this place was also unique in terms of recreation. As noted by the old-timers, there was just an amazing hunt here. A huge number of ducks, wild boars, roe deer and even tigers. It was not for nothing that the leadership of Verny came here in Tsarist times. With the advent of Soviet power, the party leadership began to travel to Iliysk and its environs, and once a man came to the village who was known throughout the country as a person who was directly involved in the revolution and creation of the Red Army, Lev Davidovich Trotsky. As the revolutionary wrote in letters to his comrades in Moscow, he was near the village of Iliysk. In the local thickets of reeds he hunted, he personally shot down 40 ducks. He saw a tiger. In addition, Trotsky talked about how he had a wonderful time fishing with his common-law spouse, Natalia Sidova. Not far from the village, there was also a mineral water resort. The archives did not contain documents confirming visits to Trotsky with his wife of this place. However, before the flooding of this region, this resort was quite popular.
Это курорт Аяк-Калкан, который называли нашим Салтубо.
The resort Ayak-Kalkan, which was called our Kazakh Skaltubo, and so on. Indeed, there were quite unique mineral waters for Kazakhstan. And the resort was, well, maybe not all Union famous, but it was definitely popular in Kazakhstan. This place was compared with Yessentuki. They even conducted a study of water. So according to the data obtained during the study, it turned out that the content of bromine and silicic acid was 0.1 grams per liter of water, 3 sources pulled out of the depth of the earth. The water temperature reached 30 degrees Celsius. They came to treat rheumatism, diseases of the gastrointestinal tract and the musculoskeletal system.
Когда началось строительство только
When construction and flooding began, it was decided that it would inevitably be flooded. All these wells were blown up. But the water was getting there for probably 20 years from that day, and now there is still a question, if it is or not there. Every year the village grew, there lived about 10,000 people. The houses were built from scrap material, as a rule it was reed and clay. In the village there was a school and a hospital. Even a cinema was built for workers. There was a cinema. It was called Rechnikov. Later on there was also a club there. There were many streets. A large hospital was built. I myself actually lived near the river. The settlement was also known for its bread. A bakery functioned in Iliysk, which supplied local villages with bakery products. Old-timers say that people came to Iliysk for a loaf of hot bread, even from the capital of Soviet Kazakhstan. The bakery was good. By the way, our bread was very famous. Even when I worked in Almaty, they even asked me to order our Kapchagai Ili bread. It was such a good bread. Locals engaged in shipping, fishing, hunting and trade. But how did it happen that the authorities did not warn the residents that their village would be flooded? In fact, it turned out to be an ordinary tale of some storytellers. After all, the evacuation of the village began long before it was flooded. A lot of work was done, first of all by the first chairman of the village council, Aitan Buketbayevich Armenov. Colossal work. They even set up a special command unit. For 1.5 years the village was resettled. Much work had been carried out. The residents settled in nearby villages. Many were offered to move into the new city already under construction. Then it was conditionally called Novoiliysk. Then it will be given the name Kapchagai, which is already familiar to everyone.
Вообще название Kapchagai, оно старше.
In general, the name Kapchagai is older than the city itself, because the valley which was blocked by the dam, this is the Kapchagai Gorge, the so-called Kapchagai dam site. Therefore, this name, it existed before. However, not all immigrants wanted to move to apartments in a young city, and there were good reasons for this. I was a kid then. I studied in the 6th or in the 7th grade. And this news came. Initially, residents did not want to move because some people apparently came here and saw that there were sandstorms. The climate was very severe. It was so hot. The sand was heating up under the sun. When the sandstorm was here, there were very low visibility, as if in a fog. The sand was everywhere. By the way, the appearance of the reservoir seriously affected the climate of the area. These changes affected even Alma-Ata, which is 70 kilometers away.
Что бросилось в глаза вот в первые годы, когда зеркало этого водохранилища достигло...
What was interesting in the early years when the mirror of this reservoir reached its maximum size? We suddenly noticed that fogs appeared quite often in Almaty. There were no fogs before that. I remember it well, because in 1971 my father bought the first Lada car in Almaty, and we needed fog lights. And I was like, "Dad, let's buy fog lights." He said, "Why? There are no fogs here." And literally in spring or autumn, the wind rose as such that from there, from the northern steppe side, the wind blows in the morning. It brings fog here. Almaty airport began to close, which probably was never closed at all because of favorable natural conditions. Be that as it may, people gradually settled in the new city. Now I live in this city since 1969. The first settlers came here in June 1968. They were my countrymen. When we moved in 1969, several houses have already been built, while the majority of Elisk people were relocated here. As for the floating coffins, it's just a city horror story. During the evacuation of Elisk, local residents were offered to rebury their relatives. Someone did it, someone didn't. The remaining graves were simply mothballed. The Sanitary Epidemiological Inspection Service arrived and poured concrete all over the place. Coming up next, why Kapchagai was called the city of weddings, and where did the legends about Lake Dinosaur come from? The construction of the Kapchagai hydroelectric station and the nearby city was carried out simultaneously. In addition to residents of the village of Elisk, it was necessary to place a huge number of specialists and builders of the dam who came here from different parts of a huge country. Everything went literally at the same time. A significant date, in 1970 the Ili River was blocked and an artificial dam was created, and the construction of the Kapchagai hydroelectric station began. A stone was laid, a symbolic plate under the foundation of the future Kapchagai hydroelectric station. As for any large-scale construction of the time, a huge number of volunteers flowed here. Council members from different regions of the country wanted to contribute to the construction of a new city, a new hydropower station. But later another company appeared in Kapchagai which became famous throughout the Soviet Union.
Статус города Капчагая в то время был город строителей и энергетики.
At that time, Kapchagai was the city of builders and power engineers. But all these are mainly male professions. But the ministers who directly supervised this construction planned the construction of the enterprise where women would be involved. Therefore, they chose the porcelain factory. Then it was the first porcelain factory in the country. The plant was built in 1975, and the first products came out on December the 31st of the same year. The best specialists from all over the country were invited to work here. Everything was ready, and the team consisted of at least 1,500 people. These were best artists, not only from Kazakhstan but also from Russian cities, even from Ukraine. In addition to specialists, the factory brought the most modern equipment. As the first director of the porcelain factory, Anatoly Vybony, said that it was the only factory in the country that would beat famous Chinese porcelain. And he was not mistaken. In the shortest period, factory started production of various dishes, figurines and other products that became famous all over the world.
Наша фарфоровая посуда была
Our porcelain was famous not only in the country, but also abroad. The warehouses, I remember, were overcrowded. They sent the carriages of the dishes. By the way, I have kept such souvenir copies. For example, little Batis, Jibek, I salute such characters. At that time, a huge number of young men and women were working in the city, mostly single. This led to Kapchagai becoming the city of the newlyweds. Kapchagai porcelain factory was famous for the fact that there, according to my information, the average age of workers was 28. And sometimes there were 15 weddings in a day. Many builders came here. They found brides for themselves here. Unfortunately, the former glory of the plant soon faded away. With the collapse of the country, it became unprofitable to produce dishes as the components for the production were imported from other, once Union republics. Raw materials were supplied from the Baltic states, from Ukraine, from Russia, from different cities. There was a very expensive delivery by train. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, economic ties with Russia, with Ukraine, with the Baltic states were interrupted. And now I cover in my books how hard it was for a porcelain factory to survive. And it closed gradually. People were dismissed. It was also thanks to the porcelain factory that another legend was born in the city, which said that there was a monster in the lake like in the Loch Ness one. They told that one of the factory workers personally saw how a large, incomprehensible animal emerged from the water near the city beach. Rumors of a dinosaur immediately spread around the city. There were also those who said yes, it is possible because before the flooding, near the village of Ilysk, there was an ancient lake, where something unknown tore fishing nets.
Старожилы это вряд ли помнят, но геологи знают, что когда-то на этом месте.
Old residents unlikely to remember that, but geologists know that at one time on this place there was the so-called Ili Lake, into which these streams from Zaili Anatau, in particular Charin Chilik, fell. But then at some point there was a breakthrough, and the whole lake was gone. Then it flowed further as Ili River. It was like that project of the new sea. It was deposited on that old Ili Lake. So could an ancient raptor live there, which moved to the Kapchagai reservoir? Perhaps such rumors spread because, as in any reservoir, people periodically drowned there. Indeed, by that time, many resorts and recreation centers had been erected on the banks of Kapchagai, where a large number of holidaymakers had come. We've talked to the journalist Andrei Mikhailov, and he told us where the tale about the dinosaur actually came from, which is not a horror movie, but a truth distorted by the human imagination.
Когда затапливали Илийск, там якобы был стационар.
When Ilysk was flooded, they said that there was a station of their Institute of Zoology, where the boxes with the skeletons of plesiosaurs were forgotten. So here is another tale telling that real plesiosaurs can be found at the bottom of Kapchagai. Coming up next, what does Kapchagai have to do with the king of Russian pop music, and how the Almaty-Kapchagai highway became famous because of the ghosts? The famous Russian pop singer Philip Kirkorov is known far beyond the borders of the CIS, but almost no one knows that he owes his existence to one resident of the city of Kapchagai. And this is not some kind of urban legend or tale, this is true. This is how it all happened. The most interesting story happened with Viktor Pavlovich Gulyaev. This is our party to the war. He is now 92 years old. He participated in the liberation of the Bulgarian city of Varna. And there, it was in 1944, by the end of the war, when we entered Varna, he was a tanker. And suddenly a boy jumped out to him. At the same time, the population greeted the Soviet tankmen and liberators with flowers. And among those people there was a boy who jumped out and almost got onto the tank of our veteran. By a happy coincidence, a Soviet tanker saw a boy and stopped his tank. He ran out of the combat vehicle and picked up the child. The boy was frightened, and then to calm him down, the tankman gave him a chocolate bar.
Наш Виктор Павлович сел в свой танк, поехал дальше.
Our Viktor Pavlovich got into his tank, drove on, and had already forgotten the story.
Таким неожиданным образом встретился.
Only the boy who met with the liberator in such an unexpected way did not forget this story. It was a boy of 10 years old.
Будущий певец и композитор Бедровский хор.
The future singer and composer Bedros Kirkorov. Over time, one of the composers and poets composed a song called Sun. And Bedros took this song into the repertoire and traveled through the cities of the Soviet Union and sang this song, Answer Me, Son.
Меня, болгарского мальчишку, танкист с улыбкою обнял.
Years later, Bedros Kirkorov arrived in Almaty with a concert. Of course, he also visited Kapchagai to perform before the residents of the new city.
И когда Бедрос запел песню «Сынок»,
And when Bedros started singing the song Son, Where Are You? Answer Me, Viktor Gulayev, then the young man remembered it and said, It was me, he said. I was in this tank. I took you in hand then. And they met with the ovations and applause of our people. It was 1988.
с тех пор их встречи продолжались.
Since then, their meetings have continued. Every time, from time to time, when Bedros Kirkorov came to the city of Almaty, he already arrived with Philip, his son. They called here several times, talked with Viktor Pavlovich. The city of Kapchagai also became famous, it was in our days, thanks to the video which was captured by random tourists on a cell phone camera. The company was driving along the Almaty-Kapchagai highway and accidentally there were 3 vague silhouettes, 2 adults and 1 child. The video became viral, it was sent to each other, it was discussed. Immediately there were many witnesses who claimed that they personally met these ghosts on the track. Supposedly, these were the souls of those killed in the accident. By the way, on this track really, cars often crashed. Later another legend appeared, more frightening, which explained a large number of accidents on the highway. According to that legend, the ghost of a woman wanders along the road with hooves instead of feet. She stops random drivers and asks them to take her to the Zarechny settlement. If the driver agrees, then he will inevitably get into an accident. If the car passes by the ghost, then it starts to chase the car and the driver hears a terrible clatter of hooves. Moreover, the storytellers claim that her hooves are not accidental, that allegedly during the Soviet era a trucker killed her at one of the cattle farms near Kapchagai, and now she's taking revenge on everyone passing by. As for the 3 ghosts by the road, then everything is simple and there is no mysticism. Later this video was exposed by other random travelers. They had a newer camera, the speed of the car was lower, and as a result, the 3 ghosts were nothing more than 3 small trees. As for the ghost of a woman with hooves, many skeptics say that this is most likely driver's fatigue, good imagination, and weather conditions that play a cruel joke with consciousness. Anyway, each person decides for himself whether he should or shouldn't believe in the legends about Kapchagai. I must admit, I also had some strange accidents once or twice. The first time was a man who looked like a monk who disappeared when we passed by. The second time, the woman who rushed under the cars. I explained it as road fatigue. My name is Andrei Slozhin. Was the time puzzle? See you.